Democrats' big folly. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, at Real Life Network, and of course, wherever podcasts are offered. And one quick note, you need to protect your IRA and 401k with gold now. Call Republican Metals at 800-783-3118 to get your free gold guide. That number again, 800-783-3118. Listen to this headline from CBS News just in the last hour. CBS News poll finds Trump's big lead grows as GOP voters dismiss indictments. Call that Democrats' biggest folly in years. And that's not a short list, I can tell you that. Trump seems bulletproof among GOP voters, polls show. That's another headline from Axios just a few hours ago as well. So let's look into what CBS reports about this. Well, there's no debate about this, CBS writes. Right now, the Republican Party would easily renominate Donald Trump for 2024. And it's not close. The former president, CBS continues to write, now holds his largest lead over his rivals in our polling amid his recent legal troubles. In fact, most of his voters cite those troubles as yet one more reason to show him support. His nearest but not too near rival, Ron DeSantis, has fallen even further back. Everyone else is in single digits. And CBS goes by the numbers. 62% of Republican voters picked Trump, 16% DeSantis, 7% Vivek Ramaswamy, 5% Pence, 3% Scott, 2% Haley, 2% Christie, and 1% Asa Hutchinson and Burgum, somebody that nobody's ever heard of. Haley and Christie tied? Come on. Haley is way more electable than Chris Christie. Different discussion, different day. But I find the sentence here significant. In fact, most of his voters cite those troubles, meaning indictments. CBS tries to water them down and call them troubles to make sense of why Donald Trump would have 62% of Republican support right now. So we have to call them troubles. In fact, most of his voters cite those troubles as yet one more reason to show him support. Of course we do. And yes, I do say we because I fully believe that the more indictments are slung Donald Trump's way, that they become the reason to vote for Donald Trump. You know, Democrats think that if they indict, and they can't keep this anti-Donald Trump narrative going up until Election Day, up through Election Day, which we don't have Election Day anymore. We have election month. So their strategy is to keep this anti-Trump, Trump's a criminal, indict Donald Trump, drag him into court narrative going and activity going through election month because they think at a certain point in time that voters will start to get the idea that, hey, now Trump must be a criminal. And so I shouldn't vote for a criminal. I should vote for one of these other Republican candidates instead. How about Chris Christie? But really, it's the opposite way. The more indictments are slung Donald Trump's way, the more Republican voters are going, wait a minute. You know, this guy led America for 4 years, right? He led America for 4 years, and he did wonderful things that put America first. He did great things for the American citizens. He improved the economy, which is something that this administration ought to take a second look at, or a first look, to put it more bluntly. He did great things for Israel. He kept America strong on the national and international stage, and he didn't allow the globalists and bureaucrats to just steamroll over America's policies and agendas to the point where we seem more in line in many respects with China than we do with America today because of Joe Biden. Donald Trump didn't put up with that. You remember when he went overseas for one of those Davos types events, G20, G7, whatever it was, and his fellow heads of state were all sort of angling to be at the front, and they dared push by Donald Trump. And what did Donald Trump do? He just stuck out his elbows and shoved right by them. That's Donald Trump's America. Hey, you're not putting me in the corner. What was that movie? That movie with Patrick Swayze, Don't Put Baby in the Corner. Well, that could have been Trump's little side motto, right? Because under Donald Trump, America was never just put in the corner and told to sit down and shut up, like today, like this present administration. So when we're looking at all these indictments, it just seems, the pile-on just seems disingenuous that a man that America knew and saw for 4 years on the national and international stages, come to find out, wow, he's this evil? He's this tyrannical? He's this dictatorial? He's this above the law? It doesn't make sense, especially when at the same time you're going after Donald Trump for documents, right? You see Joe Biden, coming out of Joe Biden's garage, all these documents, right next to where crackhead Hunter was hanging out, and nothing said there. You see the seizure of Mike Pence's documents without the need to swarm in the FBI and DOJ and all the powers of the federal authorities into his personal home. And nobody went through other politicians' wives' clothing closets and clothing drawers, all under the assumed excuse of looking for national security secrets. It just doesn't make sense. And I gotta say, the only ones who are cheering this type of attack on Donald Trump are the far left loons, right? And yes, maybe they're well funded. Maybe they're giving the Democrat Party the money that it needs to gasp along on Joe Biden's feckless administration, right? Maybe they need the donor funds to keep this puppet presidency moving along and try and find a candidate who can stand on his own, never mind stand up against the next Republican nominee, but it just doesn't seem, logically speaking, like it's working for the Democrats. And we've had so many polls in recent times showing how the American public are getting fed up with the attacks on Donald Trump. And it's not just Republicans that shoulder shrug at all these indictments, right? It's that independent voting class. And that's the one that even Democrats have to worry about. And that's where the question lies, right? That's where the big question lies. We know Republicans are staunchly defending Donald Trump, at least his base. There are some Republicans like Chris Christie who are attacking Donald Trump and would love to see him just as much as the Democrats thrown into jail. But by and large, his poll numbers with his base are either unchanged or rising, depending on whether an indictment is slung his way that day or not. Democrats, we know where they stand, right? This headline, though, just a few days ago, Georgia indictment could lead independent voters away from Trump, dated August 16th. And that is the big question out there, right? Reading from this piece, Erie News Now, a Georgia grand jury indicted former President Donald Trump and 18 of his allies. They're accused of trying to change the state's 2020 election results to favor Trump. This is Trump's fourth indictment. A political scientist believes these latest charges could have the biggest impact on an influential group of voters. Well, that's just one political scientist, and just another political scientist would say this is bunk. And there are plenty of legal minds out there that say out of all the indictments, these Georgia indictments are the most ridiculous, most absolutely ridiculous, pulled out of thin air, thrown in a kitchen sink, and then just charged Donald Trump's way, and roping in 18 of his political teammates. You know why? Not because they've done anything wrong, but because the left now wants to pick away at these 18 until they get something, some little nugget of something that they can then reshape, spin, and fabricate, form into something that sounds terrible on X, formerly known as Twitter, that ropes in Donald Trump once again as a criminal. It's all about public perception, nothing about actual law and order, and certainly nothing about the Constitution. And I have a great guest today who knows better than I do all the political ins and outs of what's taking place against Donald Trump right now, because she used to work for Donald Trump, she used to work with Donald Trump, and she is an incredible, constitutionally minded political pundit. Monica Crowley is her name, and don't forget, after you listen to this discussion with her, go check out her own podcast. It's terrific. It's called the Monica Crowley Podcast, so it's very easy to remember. No excuses there. Monica, thank you so much for being back on Bold and Blunt. It is always great to have you here.
Oh, it's always such a pleasure, Cheryl. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Donald Trump's indictments, I just want to get your response into this, because it just seems like it's a wave that isn't stopping. It's not even slowing.
No, and, we have to understand the bigger picture here. So before we get into the specifics of these individual indictments, and you're right, I don't think we've seen the end of this. I think Jack Smith, the special counsel, and perhaps some of the other Soros DAs who have slapped these indictments on Trump may come back with additional superseding indictments. So I'm not even sure that they are finished yet. But the bigger picture here is that they have spent the last 8 years since Donald Trump came down that escalator, Cheryl, trying to destroy him. And the reason is because he is an existential threat to the ruling class and their entire corrupt gravy train. And he is also the biggest obstacle to the globalist tyrants who, in most cases, are unelected and therefore unaccountable. People like John Podesta, people like John Kerry. But there are so many others who are buried deep into the government, big tech, the propaganda press, and other institutions and organizations and levers of power in this country that seek to achieve this globalist agenda. Donald Trump stands in their way. He was never supposed to be elected in 2016. The globalist movement that Barack Obama really began in earnest over 8 years was supposed to be continued by Mrs. Clinton for another 8 years and locked into place to destroy America's sovereignty and really destroy American freedom and set us on this path toward a CCP-style one world government, surveillance states, social credit scores, and everything else. Donald Trump stood in the breach and said, no, we're going to put America first. And for that crime, they have been endlessly trying to destroy him. So what you are seeing now with the series of indictments, the 91 counts against this man, is just the latest chapter in trying to take him down. Honestly, these people cannot believe that Donald Trump is still standing, Cheryl. They cannot believe it because the assault on him has been just, as you say, nonstop from the beginning, from the Russia hoax straight through his presidency to today with this latest indictment that's all just garbage indictment, shams, trying to tie him up next year and drain his resources and prevent him from running again. But he has been through so much, and they cannot believe that he is still standing, so they continue to throw the kitchen sink at him. But he is standing for all of us. He's standing for America. He's standing for our foundational principles. He wants to make America great again, and for that crime, he must be destroyed. So this fight will not end. They will keep coming at him until the man is behind bars. I said this in March of 2017. Nobody believed me at the time, but unfortunately, I've been proven true. I wish I weren't, but I am.
Does it get to a certain point? Because if you look at these charges, they all seem ridiculous. They all seem political weapons against Donald Trump to take out a political opponent. But does it get to a certain point in America where it doesn't matter that the public perception grows to the point where people don't want Donald Trump in the White House anymore at all?
Well, that is sort of the unknown question, right? So you cannot win the presidency without winning a broad swath of people. You cannot win with a base election. If your base comes out, that's great and necessary, but you cannot win the presidency with just that alone. So that is sort of the outstanding question here. Now, what we're seeing in terms of some of the polling, and the polling is all suspect this early, and frankly, it's suspect throughout the entire campaign, as we saw last time. But if the polling is to be somewhat believed, we're seeing that Donald Trump is, in most polls, running even, maybe a point or two behind Biden, but he's essentially running even with Biden or even ahead of Joe Biden. And that tells me, Cheryl, that a lot of the American people are taking a look at this pile-on Donald Trump and saying, oh, come on. Right? Because the first thing is you may not like Donald Trump. You may not appreciate him in a political sense at all. Maybe you didn't vote for him. But you don't have to reach back very far. You don't have to go back to the Reagan years to remember a booming economy. You just have to go back 3 years pre-COVID to the booming Trump economy. Your life was so much better. The economy was thriving. Your income was up. Your wages were up. Your job was more stable. You had more upward mobility. The border was secure. There was more law and order. The president was bringing home American troops from these ridiculous, endless wars. So the country was in a much better place, and you were in a much better place. That memory is still very fresh for a lot of people.
Yes.
And I think they are now comparing it to the absolute catastrophe of the Biden presidency. So that's number one coming into play. And number two coming into play, I think their greed with slapping him with so many indictments has actually woken a lot of people up, Cheryl. I think, when people get greedy, it undermines their goal. So, for example, and I've used this analogy on my podcast. Let's say you've got a small business and you've hired someone to work the cash register, and that person is taking $1 or maybe $5 out of the register once a month. You may not catch that person because they're flying under the radar, right? But the moment that person gets greedy and starts taking $100 out of the cash register every month, that's when that person is going to get caught. I think the same dynamic is happening here, where if there had been one prosecutor who hit Trump with one indictment and one count, I think maybe a lot of people would have said, maybe Trump did do something illegal. Maybe he did do something wrong. Let's see how it plays out. But the fact that the left got greedy and overreached so dramatically with these 91 counts and 4 major indictments with probably more to come, that has turned a lot of people's heads. And they're saying, oh, come on, wait a minute. This is ridiculous. All the man wanted to do was make America great again. Maybe I didn't like his tweets. Maybe I didn't like his style. Maybe I found his presidency too chaotic. But this is out of control. And so I think you're seeing a backlash beginning to really brew. And it is an unknown path we're on here. We don't know. Maybe it'll turn out that people will say, you know what, this is just too much chaos. I can't with this. Or people might say our country is hanging on the brink, and what's happening to Trump is emblematic of it. And now I'm going to rally to him. So we just don't know quite yet how it's going to play out.
It is very difficult to read the tea leaves because, like you, I was believing that the backlash was brewing, that Americans by and large were saying this is ridiculous. And they were concerned if this is what happens to Donald Trump, a man like Donald Trump, think what can happen to me. But moments before we started speaking, Monica, I caught this news item at the Hill, and it's in reference to this just released Fox News poll. A majority of registered voters, 53%, said they think Trump, quote, did something wrong. And a lot of them believe that he actually was responsible for efforts to overturn the election. So now I'm in question about what you just described. It's very difficult to get a read on the nation right now.
Well, that's right, because if that poll is accurate,
right.
and you have a little over a majority of Americans who think Trump, quote, did something wrong, does that mean they think he did something illegal and that it's disqualifying for
right.
the presidency?
Right.
That's another whole set of questions, right? Because I think most Americans believe that most, if not all, politicians at some point do something wrong. Certainly
yes.
presidents do. So are they willing to cut slack here? Are they seeing the truth about this assault on Donald Trump because of what he has tried to do in putting America and Americans first? And will they now say, this pile-on is just too much? Or will they say, love Trump, love what he did, but we got to get back to some sense of normalcy, as if normalcy is even possible in America anymore. I don't think so, but that's a separate issue. We just don't know how it's going to play out, Cheryl. So the next year plus is going to be very interesting indeed.
And I think the media is going to play a large part in public perception here. I just caught a headline from The Guardian that said Trump's latest indictment leads to fears of rise in calls for violence. So it seems like the media is weighing in dutifully, getting behind the left in order to drive people away from Trump, to be scared to vote for Trump. I just think the media has a big responsibility here in reporting accurately, but they're falling flat as usual.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, I call them the propaganda press because that's exactly what they are. They're just wingmen for the Democrat Party, for the left, for the globalists. They're not interested in actually discovering, excavating, and reporting the truth. You can't count on them for anything. They're just doing the dirty work for the left and for the Democrats. And, they try to drum up these kinds of things like, we might get violence so that it's teed up for the left to execute and carry out the violence, which is what we saw in 2020 with Antifa and Black Lives Matter burning down America. I'm sure that they are teeing up a similar kind of crisis plan for next year.
Last question here, Monica, because I know that you're very busy. But because of your insider knowledge and your personal work in Donald Trump's administration, if you had the chance to advise him right now going forward on how best to protect himself legally and protect his bid for the White House, what would you say?
Yes, well, thank you for that question, Cheryl. I'm not an attorney, so I would not even begin to offer him legal advice. He's got some excellent attorneys around him who are advising him well and are taking on all of these cases. The ultimate objective, of course, is to sideline Donald Trump. They want him in prison for the rest of his life. I think he's facing something like 900 years in jail. That's what they have wanted all along. They certainly want him ineligible to ever run for president again, never mind actually occupy the Oval Office. So that's their goal. And, I try not to allow my wishful thinking to kick in. He is in some significant legal peril here because the left has weaponized the DOJ, the FBI. Now you also know why George Soros spent tens of millions of dollars to elect radical communist DAs around the country. He's getting a good return on investment there. So he is in some substantial legal peril here. We know that these indictments are garbage. It's all junk. It's all a sham. But that doesn't mean that the left won't prosecute him to the full extent, try to get a conviction that will stick. So his lawyers are on top of this. This is very serious. It's extremely damaging to the country. But of course, their other goal is to destroy the country. So they are, killing two birds with one stone with these Trump indictments. In terms of politically, I believe that Donald Trump is always at his best when he's focused on policy. So he has put out a long series of different videos on policy issues, whether it's on the economy, or on the border, or on foreign policy, or on rebuilding the military, or on our great cities and how to bring them back, how to restore America back to greatness. These videos are critically important to him getting his message out on policy, because there's so much distraction around him and his persona, his style, his Truth Social posts, and formerly his tweets, and what he has to say about X, Y, and Z, how he carries himself. If I were advising him, I'd try to keep that noise down as much as possible. And I know it's hard because you're dealing with Donald Trump. He's going to say and do what he wants, as he should. But I would try to minimize that noise on that side and really stay focused talking to the American people about his extraordinary first-term record. He delivered a booming economy, secure border, and world peace. That's it. Those are the three issues that you really focus on with the American people. You focus on that, focus on the specific policies, and let everything else kind of fall into place. That would be my best advice.
And that clarifies, he does have the winning message after all, so the American people still are on his side. And Monica Crowley, I want to thank you so much for your analysis. It's always great to hear from you, and best of wishes with your continuing successes on your own podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Cheryl. It is always great to talk to you, and you will be a guest on my podcast coming up in the next couple of weeks, so I look forward to that as well. It's always a joy to join you.
Oh, I can't wait. Thank you so much. Monica Crowley, the true, original, happy warrior. If you are a conservative and you're retired, Republican Metals believes you need to protect that savings now. Currency change is coming. Call Republican Metals at 800-783-3118. That's 800-783-3118. And if you like Bold and Blunt, I want to remind you, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are offered. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate your time. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.